Hey guys, welcome back to A Page in the Chapter, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Paige and today we are doing my August wrap up. August was the best reading month I have had all year. I read 10 books in the month of August. This has not happened since since I was a student, basically. I am absolutely gobsmacked. I did not think it was even possible for me to read 10 books in a month these days, but I completely smashed the TBR and then just went beyond that. It was very freeing and incredible, and I'm really hoping to continue with this momentum. I really want September to be just as good a reading month. I have so many good books that I want to read. If you are interested in knowing what my September TBR is, then I will link that up in the cards, whichever side they are, and down in the description, so you guys can go and check that out if you would like to. But yeah, I'm absolutely stunned that I was able to read this much, and now it's time to discuss all of these books with you. So if you guys like TBRs and wrap-ups, then do please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below and stay tuned for future content. I upload bookish videos twice a week on a Wednesday and a Friday, but there is also a wrap-up and a TBR every single month, so there's no shortage of that content if you'd like to see that. You guys can also check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Page in Chapter to see what I'm reading and how I'm reviewing it in real time. And without further ado, let's get into the books, because this is going to be a long one. So the first book that I have to share with you is The Subtle Knife by Phillip Pullman. It feels like 2 or 3 months ago that I read this book, not the start of August. This is the second book in his Dark Materials trilogy, which I have been slowly making my way through, and I did vlog my experience of reading this if you are interested. I'm not entirely sure how well I will remember my thoughts, so it might be best to go check that out. I really liked this book. I liked it a lot more than I liked Northern Lights. I felt like this one captured my attention a lot more, made me actually want to continue with the series in a way that Northern Lights didn't. This book chronicles Will's tale as he is running from some very bad men, and he meets Lyra, and together they are piecing together what on earth is going on. And whilst I have heard negative reviews of this series, that it gets very religious in terms of messaging and things like that, in this book you can definitely see that it is taking that direction, but I didn't feel like it hampered my enjoyment of the book or anything yet. Maybe in the Amber Spyglass it will, but for now, honestly, I really enjoyed this series. I will be picking up and reading the Amber Spyglass closer to November, December time. Yeah, I don't have too many other thoughts. As far as a middle grade goes, I enjoyed it. And so then I carried out my first reread for the Taylor Jenkins readathon, and that was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I tabbed this one up with all of my favourite moments. This is just my favourite book of all time. I mean, it's my favourite Taylor Jenkins Reid book, but it's also just in general my favourite book of all time. I didn't really tab for anything specifically in terms of, like, sometimes I do colour-coded tabs for different things. I didn't do that this time. They are all the same colour tab, except for towards the end when I ran out of that colour tab. And they are all moments that make this book a 5-star for me. And I am genuinely intrigued to know how many tabs I have. I have exactly 30 tabs. So to me, there are exactly 30 5-star moments, quotes, lines, events in this book, which is probably more than most other books that I give 4 or 5 stars. So I speak very highly of this book. I do think it is a book that you should go into not really knowing much about it. I think it definitely doesn't lose something by you knowing what happens, but the first time I read this, I didn't know anything about it. I genuinely thought that it was going to be about the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I would be choosing which husband I shipped her with the most. And so going into it with that perspective back in 2020 when I first read it, made it for that much more a spectacular read. Yeah, all I'm going to tell you is that this is about the husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Next, it was time for Twisted Hate by Huang. I really don't know how to say her name, it's a problem. This is the 3rd book in the Twisted series and follows Jules and Josh. They have a enemies to lovers trope and a best friend's brother kind of situation. I really enjoyed this book. It is not as good as Twisted Games for me. I don't think anything will top Twisted Games. I loved that book so much, but it was definitely fun. I definitely enjoyed it more than Twisted Love, so for me it goes Twisted Games, Twisted Hate, then Twisted Love last. But whilst I didn't think you needed to read Twisted Love for Twisted Games, I do think you need to read Twisted Love in order to read Twisted Hate, because Ava and Jules, the main female characters of those books, are best friends. But then also, I think his name is Alex, and Josh from this book, the male love interest, they are also best friends. And their romance stories are just so intertwined that I do think it would be helpful to you to have read Twisted Love before going into this. One thing that I did particularly like about this book is that it was Jules who messed up the relationship and caused like the second act conflict. Normally it's only the men that do that. I don't know if I've ever really seen a woman actually mess up the relationship in these books, and because we were reading from Jules's perspective the whole time, it just made it that much more rich and interesting. So I definitely did enjoy this book. It didn't blow me away as much as Twisted Games did. I decided to give Emily Henry another shot, having hated You and Me on Vacation, or at least not hated, because I think I rated it 3 stars, but looking back I would give it way less. I really did not enjoy Emily Henry's friends to lovers thing. It was really boring. However, I decided to give Beach Read another go because it was kind of book related and everyone loves Emily Henry so much, and I just wanted something very light, fluffy and summery. I decided to give this another go, and I'm really glad that I did, because I adored this book. I don't know why I ever started with You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. Like, this is her best one. I don't think it can be topped. A perfect romance. I absolutely adored Augustus. He was just the cutest character, and I left with quite the Gus obsession. Someone did point out to me though that every love interest in an Emily Henry book is basically Gus with a different name, and having read them all now I kind of agree with that. But the original Gus, like, I mean, he quite literally was the blueprint, but he was just the best one too. There is quite a lot of depth to this book. It is not just a romance book. I'd say it's kind of like a literary fiction with a romance element. It's not really the light-hearted fluffy book that I wanted. It's not as dark or anything as like Twisted Love, which is not light-hearted at all. It's not quite as fluffy as Book Lovers or You and Me on Vacation. Our characters have a lot of trauma that they are working through on the pages of this book, and it was very satisfying and wonderful to see them overcome it, and I still loved every moment of reading it. But I really do think that people need to stop marketing or like recommending this book as a really fluffy summery read. Like, it is not. It is a literary fiction about people with very dark traumatic lives who happen to overcome it by finding love. And one of the sole arguments that January is making in this book is that if she were a man writing books about men, then it wouldn't be classed as romance. It would be like a dark literary fiction book that just happened to have like a bit of a happy ending, but because she's a woman it's automatically classed as like this light fluffy romance and no one takes it seriously. I think we all just kind of missed the point when we read that, because we have done exactly the same thing to Emily Henry and we've slapped this book as a light fluffy romance that shouldn't be taken seriously, and it actually deals with some very serious topics. So I adored this book. I will be rereading it all of the time. It is a new favourite romance for sure. Highly recommend this one over any other Emily Henry book. And then next it was time for the Daisy Jones and the Six. Wow, my light is a little bit too bright for this book. This is another Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I read for the Taylor Jenkins Read Along. This follows a band called Daisy Jones and the Six, who in the 70s reached the absolute pinnacle of their career. Everybody was in love, their new album was doing incredibly well, and then they just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. The band broke up right at the height of its fame and no one knows why, and it chronicles the band being interviewed in the present talking about what all went wrong in the 70s. And Taylor Jenkins Reid just has a way of keeping you completely engrossed in very, very normal, mundane things. I don't think anyone else would be able to write this story because I think it would just be too boring, but Taylor Jenkins Reid can make it so good, and I am so excited for the adaptation of this. I'm really hoping that I will be able to watch it in the UK because I'm genuinely more excited about this adaptation than I am about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I did then pick up Book Lovers as well by Emily Henry, and since I had adored Beach Read so much, I was really expecting to love this one just as much. This one fell a bit flat for me as well. I definitely preferred it to You and Me on Vacation. It was very fluffy, very adorable. There were things that I really loved about this book, and again I probably would reread it, but it just did not quite hit the same for me as Beach Read did. I don't know, I was expecting to be blown away and genuinely surprised by how much I loved it again, and it just fell a little bit flat. So this follows our main character Nora, and she is a literary agent, and it follows her and her nemesis Charlie, who is an editor, as they deal with this like rivals to lovers thing, but it's not really rivals to lovers. There's not really any rivalry in this book at all, but I did thoroughly enjoy the fact that Nora is a complete workaholic, and this book is not her going to a small town learning to not be a workaholic. Like, the book actually makes fun of that trope in romances, and Nora very much gets to maintain her love for her job, want to keep living in the city, want to keep working herself to the bone, and gets her romance as well, and I did really enjoy that. So there was nothing particularly wrong about this book other than the fact that I wouldn't say it's a rivals to lovers. I don't know, there was just something about it that missed a little bit for me. I think as well because by the time I read this book, someone had already pointed out that all of Emily Henry's love interests were the same. I really just saw it, and I think that kind of ruined my enjoyment a little bit. And so then after Book Lovers, I kind of decided to stay on that same vein, but I took a little bit of a risk because I hadn't seen anybody talking about this book at all, and that is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon, and I really enjoyed this book. It was such good, wholesome reading. It follows our main character Ari, and she works as a weather girl at a local station, except the local station is kind of being run into the ground because the two people that run the station are like exes, and so they are just running the station into the ground in order to get back at each other basically. And so Ari teams up with one of her work colleagues, Russell, to plot to get their bosses back together so that they can both start to improve at their jobs and things at the station will start to run more smoothly. What I enjoyed so much about this book is that it is very much an exploration of mental health and learning to trust yourself and trust somebody else when you are dealing with particularly depression in this book. There is also some varied representation in this book. Our main character is Jewish and Russell is Jewish but was in a relationship with a non-Jewish woman and has a daughter, so it also deals with him and how he's raising his daughter in terms of religion. And I just feel like the representation was very solid. I felt very seen at the end of this book. I felt very represented, and I just thought that it was all handled beautifully, and I felt so cozy and warm and wonderful by the end of this book. It's not one that I would really recommend for romance. I didn't think the romance really swept me off my feet, but I did like reading about very normal characters with normal jobs who looked normal. You know, you didn't have any of this like big hunk of a masculine guy with like 12 abs. They were just very normal people dealing with things that we all deal with every day and just learning to love each other through that. So I wouldn't read this again for the romance. If I wanted a romance book, I would pick up another one. If you just want something cozy and like good solid cozy depression, like if you just want something kind of like that for a rainy Sunday, then I do think this book is the perfect choice. I then picked up another fantasy book. I've read not just one fantasy book in the month of August, I picked up 2 and I finished 2 of them. I am back. I am back, and that is because I finished Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Graudon, and I actually really enjoyed this book. So this is not a new book by any means. It has been on my wish list for a very long time, but I finally got around to reading it. So this is a alternative reality fantasy which kind of follows a version of events where what would happen if Hitler and Germany had won the war, and it follows our main character Yael, and when she was living in a concentration camp there were tests performed on her which gave her the ability to kind of like shapeshift, like shift her face to look like somebody else's, and so she is using this power to pose as a successful athlete, win a competition that will allow her to meet Hitler, and then she is going to kill him as part of the resistance. It is a very good book. I did feel like some bits were a bit boring and a bit out of place, but for the most part I was just kind of hooked, and I actually had a dream about this book last night. Yeah, Hitler then appeared in my dream, so that was fun for me. It obviously deals with some very heavy topics, but the book is still very appropriate for a YA audience. It managed to handle these heavy topics in a nuanced way, but also in quite a light-hearted way, so it didn't feel too depressing, because we all know that I don't typically go for depressing books. I kind of reached the end of this book and was like, yeah, I could actually read the next one. I did get to the end of this and I was completely gobsmacked by the ending. Did not see it coming. It took me by complete surprise, and now I kind of just have to know what's gonna happen next. And then we have the final reread for the Taylor Jenkins read along, and that is, you guessed it, Malibu Rising. I obviously really wanted to read Carrie Soto is Back. I was really hoping that Waterstones would have their shit together, or to be honest I think I was just hoping that I would be the exception. I have not been. There is no update on where my signed copy of Carrie Soto is Back is. I literally went to Waterstones the other day and they had them out, so I should have just bought another one and cancelled my order, but I didn't, and I'm still waiting for it. But anyway, I did reread Malibu Rising, and this one had quite surprising results. I now think that this is like the worst Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I was even like, I never change ratings when I reread, ever, but I did kind of get to the end of this book and think maybe I shouldn't have given this 5 stars. I'm not entirely sure this is a 5-star read for me anymore. I still adore the Reaver siblings and I adore Nina as our main character, and again, Taylor Jenkins Reid just has a way of making very boring, mundane things exciting to read about. It started to fall apart for me in part 2 of this book when we actually get to the party. So the book follows the Reaver siblings, and they are the children of Mick Reaver, one of Evelyn Hugo's husbands, and every summer at the end of the summer they throw a big party. Think Taylor Swift's 4th of July parties, like huge, like a load of celebrities invited, loads of media coverage, like just an absolutely massive summer party. And it tells the story of one day, the day like that this party is taking place, and we know going into this book that by 6 AM the next morning the whole party has kind of gone up in flames. And the problem for me that I had this time around was that when I got to the part 2 of this book, which actually follows the party, absolutely every single celebrity who turns up at this party seems to get a point of view. There was just too many points of view, and I did not have a problem with it the first time. So maybe it's just because I was rereading it quite recently after reading it and I knew what happened, so it was just kind of boring to read all these points of view that I didn't care about because it wasn't really telling me anything that I didn't already know. I don't know what the problem was, because I gave this book 5 stars the first time I read it. It was my favourite book of last year. I was obsessed with it, but it just didn't hit quite the same this time around. And then the final book I picked up was a new release, and I do have some thoughts, and that is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. My history with the Love Hypothesis is I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely adored it though. I would have given it 5 stars if it wasn't for the academia representation and like the women in STEM representation. I've given this book 2.5 stars, and it was only because of one little event at the end that kind of brought me to tears. that I gave it that, I was floating around the 2-star mark. Firstly, I just wasn't feeling a connection between our characters at all. I really enjoyed Levi as a character. He is such a cinnamon roll, cute, wonderful character, but I just could not see him with B. This is firstly a book about neurobiology. The first 150 pages are just a neurobiology lesson, and I adore Ali Hazelwood's love for her subject, but I wasn't feeling it, and I came into this book for academia romances. I just didn't really care for the biology lesson. It felt like Ali Hazelwood didn't really have a story here, and so she was just padding it out with a lot of science. There was a hell of a lot of science, and I know more about Marie Curie than I ever could have possibly wanted to know. It was just like word vomit about Marie Curie. So it follows our main character B, and her career as a neurobiologist is stalling a bit, but she is invited to be a co-lead on a NASA project with her nemesis from grad school, Levi. A lot of the women in STEM representations that bothered me in the love hypothesis hadn't been addressed in this book, and it was worse because I just wasn't really getting the romance either. It was very much just a book about science, but it was as if the whole book was just, its whole purpose was to discourage anyone from going into science or academia. As someone who wants to do a PhD and go into academia, I leave Ali Hazelwood's books thinking, okay, maybe it isn't for me and I shouldn't pursue this career path. And that is so not good. Just in one of her books, can she please have a conflict that isn't just sexism? And it was so over exaggerated in this book too. And I am sure that women in STEM face sexism every day. I'm not saying that that is not a lived experience, and of course there should be representation for that, but Ali Hazelwood just seems to do it on a crack, and she draws so much attention to it, and she's not really targeting the right audiences. Convincing young women who are reading this that all they're going to face is sexism and people putting them down and a career that they can't be happy in is not going to fix the sexism in STEM. Yeah, I really did not like this book. I will continue to reread The Love Hypothesis. It hasn't marred my thoughts on that book, but I honestly think you can save your time and money with this book. It just didn't do it for me at all. So here we have the 10 books, I'm standing on my tiptoes so you can see them all, that I read in the month of August. I cannot believe what a good reading month it was, and I am so excited to keep going in September and just keep this momentum. I have been adoring reading lately. It is a true passion and obsession again, and I am living for it. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this wrap up. If you did, then please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below and stay tuned for bookish content every Wednesday and every Friday here on A Page in the Chapter. You guys can also check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Page in Chapter. Why would you not? It's just more bookish content, and we all need more bookish content in our lives. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you are having a fantastic week. You are enjoying everything that you are reading, and there are no reading slumps in your future, and I will see you next week for my next video. Bye guys.